I'm a bit of a history nerd. I love learning about stories from the past. But one thing that always nags at me is how do we know that the history we're learning is what really happened? As I've dug into various history topics over the years while making some of my documentaries, I've encountered quite a few challenges. Some I didn't even know to watch out for. We've all heard the saying that history is written by the victors. Well, in a lot of cases, that's true. A lot of times when it comes to military history, we only have one side of the story. You don't always have written accounts from people who were on the losing side of a battle. Perhaps, there were no survivors on the losing side. If you go back far enough, some of those people might not have even known how to read or write. Or maybe there's written accounts that we just haven't even uncovered yet. We also have to take into account that propaganda becomes the prevailing story in a lot of cases. A perfect example of this is the myth that Napoleon was short. Modern reinterpretations and evaluations of historic documents have found it turns out he was actually about 5'6" or 5'7", which at the time was completely average height. So the idea that he was short and, the whole Napoleon complex thing, most people think was just British propaganda to basically slander their enemy. But that's also the prevailing account that has endured through history. Another thing that happens a lot with history is that the popular version, or the version the public knows about, gets kind of condensed down, an abridged version. A good example of this is the United States celebration of their independence on July 4th every year. The reality is, independence was declared by the Continental Congress on July 2nd. The Declaration of Independence document was actually finalized and agreed upon on July 4th. But then it wasn't fully signed until, I believe it was August 2nd of 1776. All of this gets condensed down in the popular imagination and the popular retelling of this piece of history to the idea that the Declaration was conceived and written and signed all on July 4th, which is not actually the historic accurate account. Typically, the best way to go about researching history is to try to find primary source documents. What that is documents written by people who were actually at the event that they're documenting. Otherwise, it's kind of like you're playing a several hundred years long version of that game Telephone. You want to try to get people who are actually at the event and their account. Sometimes it's journals, letters to loved ones home, or it might actually just be a detailed account of a battle or an event. Now, when we're dealing with these, we do need to factor in that whoever wrote the document has a perspective. They are sharing their perspective, not necessarily an objective truth.
When we look at sources, when we look at documents, understand and always keep in mind they have a perspective in mind. They have an agenda, as any human being does when they write anything down. They have an agenda. They have interests. And the story they tell almost inevitably is going to serve those interests in some way.
In one of my own documentaries about the siege of Fort William Henry, there's a lot of first-hand accounts that were written during the siege or by people who were actually at the siege that contradict each other. So, there's French accounts that conflict with the British accounts because they were at odds with each other. And each one of those sides has their own agenda, their own perspective of the events, and they want to obviously make their side look good. Very few people are going to portray themselves as the villain in a story.
This horrid scene of blood and slaughter obliged our officers to apply to the officers of the French Guard for protection, which they refused.
The French were not by any means indolent spectators. One of our sergeants, who had opposed himself bravely to their violence, was struck to the earth by the blow of a spear.
Another thing to take into account is that historic accounts, first-hand accounts by people at, maybe the Civil War or something like that, are often written after the fact, maybe days or even years after the events that they are recording.
Written history is what somebody recollects, and everyone's recollections become muddled in time and sometimes even merge with other people's recollections. So it's not easy to rely upon a single account of an event. Oftentimes that is the case that you have to, because there's only the one account that you can find. That certainly is one of the benefits of having the internet, because there is just so much more information that is available at your fingertips now through the internet, that when I started my detailed research of this topic in the early 70s, there was no access to this kind of material. It was all printed material. And if you didn't know the name of a source, or if you didn't know where to go looking for more information, you couldn't find it. And with the internet now, all you have to do is type in 3 words, Fort William Henry, and you get pages and pages and pages of information. Some of it good, some of it not so good. But it's a place to start.
Nowadays, with the internet, it's important to really find good sources. One of the videos I made is about a soldier named Jacob Miller in the Civil War who was shot right between the eyes and lived. It turns out there was at least 2 soldiers named Jacob Miller during the Civil War. And looking online, there's been several blogs or social media posts that have gotten the 2 confused and think that they're actually just one person. So they're attributing the achievements of one Jacob Miller onto another Jacob Miller, and that's just not the case. One thing I really wasn't prepared for when digging into history was the etymology of words. Words change their meaning over time. Most people today would consider this a tomahawk, which could also be described as a hatchet or a small axe. In colonial times, that isn't what a tomahawk was at all. I first came across this curiosity when making my Siege of Fort William Henry documentary. I was including this quote in the film.
Early this morning, we were ordered to prepare for our march, but found the Indians in a worse temper, if possible, than last night. Every one having a tomahawk, hatchet, or some other instrument of death.
I thought it was strange that historic quote said a tomahawk or a hatchet, since both basically describe a small axe. Then I came across this quote from 1723, written by a French Jesuit priest who described what a tomahawk looked like. The tomahawk is made of the horn of a stag, or of wood in the shape of a cutlass, and terminated by a large ball. This description of a tomahawk is essentially what we in modern times would call a Native American war club. Illustrations from colonial America also support the description given by that French Jesuit priest. Who knows how many other words have changed their meaning over the years that's allowing us here in modern times to misinterpret history. I really love digging into history and nerding out doing the research and trying to shape it into a compelling narrative for some of my videos and documentaries. It's also taught me quite a bit. We think of history as something that already happened and can't change. But it does change, or at least our understanding of it. New documents are often uncovered, and old documents are often looked at in a new light or with a better understanding. Maybe, as I mentioned, we understand the old meaning of a word better and go back and revisit documents that have already been known about, or perhaps a new document sheds light on an older document. So our understanding of history is constantly evolving, and we can never actually know what happened in the past because we weren't there, and because the documents that we have, and in more modern times, film reels, audio recordings, these are all taken from a certain perspective. So, the full story is never truly going to be known and is always going to be evolving. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of the other videos on my channel which cover a wide variety of subjects. If you want to keep up with what I'm working on, head over to my website and sign up for my newsletter.